Hey everyone, what's up? I'm at the dog park again. Where's Filo? Filo, F-I-L-O, not F-I-D-O. Oh, he's right underneath. There he is. Anyway, first of all, yes, when I make my videos, I am pretty much always going to be wearing what I'm wearing. I am currently unemployed, and I left my part-time job as a brand consultant the other week, and other than that, I've been a freelance independent contractor for brand consulting for US or international brands launching in China. I'm still doing that, but for intents and purposes, I'm unemployed, so I'm dressing how I want. I'm working out once or twice a day, so when you see me, I'm gonna be looking like this. I have these pearls in because I had an interview with a potential business partner this morning on Skype, and I forgot to take the pearls out. Also, as a side hobby, I'm selling these pearls. I have a huge collection of Filipino pearls. If you want any, please get in touch. So I thought I'd share the story today of how I came to get my dog, the love of my life, little Filo, F-I-L-O. And I think it's an alright story. I was living in Chengdu. This was in 2013. I was living in the western Chinese city, meaning in the west, not like western, like modern, but the Chinese western city of Chengdu, which is near Tibet. And it's an alright city. It's a city of 12 million, a lot of consumption power. People have a fair amount of money there, and my job was to set up basically a distribution center for Duvel Morcat, the beer producer in Belgium. So I was doing sales. I was selling to hotels, bars, restaurants, and pushing these Belgian ales, and it was an all right job. Pay was all right. They gave me health insurance. I set my own hours. I was kind of my own boss. So yeah, I guess it was good, but I was kind of bored. And to be frank, I was getting really lonely. It was not an easy city for a Westerner to live in if that Westerner were mentally engaged and wanting constant stimulation. And I think that's true in a lot of developing cities and developing countries, that it's a little slow. And I'm someone who likes to go out and do stuff and go to events and be part of communities. And in Chengdu, it was a bit of a struggle for me. It was a little slow for my taste. So anyway, I was feeling really down, and I thought, all right, I'll get myself a pet. That'll give me something to do, give me some company. And I was like, only crazy people would get dogs. Like, I'm only in my 20s. I shouldn't have that responsibility. So I decided to get a cat. So that day, I decided to get a cat. I looked up where the cat shelter was. I, wrote down the address. And it was a Sunday, so I was like, all right, Sunday, my day off. Not that every other day I don't set my own hours, but Sunday I'm gonna go to the cafe, get myself a pastry, get a coffee, and then go get a cat. So I got on my scooter. Oh, crick in the neck. I got on my scooter, biked across town, went to the cafe, like the one good cafe in Chengdu at that time. And it was closed because the owners are these super devout Christians, and they closed on Sunday, which is unheard of in China. So I was like, oh man, well, guess I'll just go get a cat now. So at that moment, I was biking, and the cafe was in the Tibetan quarter of town. You know how there's Chinatown in Western cities? Well, there's a Tibet town in Chengdu. And yes, there's a lot of armored police vehicles around because they're afraid of the Tibetans having some kind of protest. So I'm on my scooter, I'm biking through Tibet town, and I hear this awful noise. And it's the sound of a puppy crying. And I was like, oh my gosh. It wasn't just simpering crying, it was kind of like a wailing, cry for help cry. And so in China, there's this thing called weiguan. Weiguan. And it means when people circle around and watch as something bad happens, usually. And it's a phenomenon that I am very passionately opposed to because what it implies is something bad happens, people circle around and watch and take pictures, and nobody helps. Usually it's when someone gets hit by a car. And I have a story about when I got hit by a car, which I can share in maybe the next video if I remember. So people were weiguaning, and they were circling around, and I couldn't see what was happening, but I heard this puppy, and I was like, oh God, oh God. And I had promised myself in previous times that if I ever saw something happening like that, and I saw people weiguan, that I would not also weiguan, that I would go help, because otherwise I'd be a hypocrite. So the light turned green, but I turned my scooter off. I didn't turn my scooter off. I turned it around, and I, slowly rode over to where the people were circled up. And I saw that it was a Tibetan man who was maybe 45, 50, 55. And just to paint the picture, Tibetan man, like, I knew he was Tibetan because the way he looked, like, he was darker skinned and his features were not Chinese. And other than that, I mean, like, he was dressed like a normal, like, slimy person, like wearing all black, dirty clothes. And he was on his own scooter. And he had this adorable black puppy, adorable, to fit in the palm of your hand. And it was crying, and it was trying to get away from him, and he kept grabbing it and putting it on his scooter, and then it would jump off, and he'd grab it and pull it back. And I don't think he was kicking or hitting it, but he was definitely being rough with it. And he was laughing, and he was like, haha, like, stay down, puppy. And his buddy, who, they honestly seemed like they were in some kind of gang or something, his buddy or two were like standing in front of the store, and the puppy kept trying to run into the store, and eventually they just let it run in, and they're all laughing like, oh, that stupid dog. I don't know what the deal was. I don't know why they had this puppy. I don't know what they were going to use him for. Oh, I'm going to get emotional. But I was like, I couldn't. It was awful. So I rode up to him, and I said in Chinese, is that your dog? And he said something back to me in Tibetan. I guess he didn't really speak Mandarin. And I was like, you can't treat dogs like that. Like, you shouldn't do that. And he was like, what? Like, he didn't know what I was saying. So I was in too deep. I couldn't get out. I took out the only language that everyone understands, which is money. I pulled out my wallet. I only had a 100 kwai bill in there, which, at the time was like $16 US. I pulled it out, and I was like, all right. And I just handed it to him, and I said, give me the dog, please. And he was like, all right. He took it, and the dog was like, I guess it was like near him, because I remember just picking it up and holding it in my hands and looking into its eyes, big brown puppy eyes, and my heart in that moment, it was like magic. I imagine it's what it's like. A lot of people say when they have kids, it's instant love. I felt instant love, and I was like, I just knew, like, I knew in half a second, like, I was gonna have this dog the rest of its life. I wasn't putting it up for adoption, like, and it stopped crying and whining immediately. As soon as I picked it up, it went silent. It was just looking at me, and I was like, huh. And meanwhile, the Tibetan guys were laughing. They were like, 100 kwai, look at this shit. And hopefully after that, they didn't go make a business out of picking on puppies in front of white people. But, so I drove away with him in my lap, and he fell asleep or just like kind of went down very quickly. And I called, my boyfriend at the time, and I called the vet, and we talked about it. And I was like, I'm not giving this dog up. Like, it was the cutest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I decided to call it Filo. I decided that because it was so cute, and it was also just very scrappy, and it had fought. It was like fighting for its freedom. And it reminded me of Filo from Filo Goes West, the mouse in that cartoon movie. But I couldn't remember the name of the dog of the mouse, and I was like, I think it's Filo. Plus, I wanted a name Chinese people could say, and they can't say Filo, so I said Filo, and so I called him Filo, Filo. Now, Filo, I set him up in my sunroom that night. I gave him like a bunch of towels and like newspaper, and he just cried and cried and cried until I let him into my bed, and he's been sleeping at the foot of my bed ever since. And the next day, so okay, that's how I adopted him. The next day, I took him out on some client calls. I went around to some bars to check in on them. And in Chengdu, they leave rat poison lying around. At least in Beijing, it's in these blocks, these like metal blocks, and it says caution rat poison, and like dogs can't get into them, only rats, they're smaller. But in Chengdu, they leave it out like it's dog food. They leave it in a pile or they leave it in a pan. So my little puppy in this bar runs over and starts eating something, and I'm like, what? And then I look and it's rat poison. I'm like, oh my God. And of course the bar owner, you know, in the Chinese manner is like, oh, may sure, like, oh, it's nothing, don't worry about it. And I was like, and so I called, you know, the vet and the boyfriend again, and I was like, my dog's gonna die. So like I was pumping like liquid soap down its poor little throat to make it vomit, because that's what you're supposed to do. Didn't work. I went out on the street. I was trying everything to make him vomit, and I was starting to cry because I thought he was gonna die. And this Chinese woman came up and she's like, "Can I help you?" And I was like, "Oh, my dog." And she's like, "What can I do to help?" And I said, "Do you have 10 kwai so I can get a taxi to go to the vet?" And she pulled out 20 kwai. And I was like, "Oh, actually, I have money. I'm sorry, I don't need that. Just help me get a cab." So she helped me get a cab, and she was like, "No, take the money. And I was like, "No, I don't actually need it, but thank you." And so that was really nice. Went to the vet. The poor thing, they tied him up and they forced a syringe down his throat, so he puked, and it was awful. He was shaking and had an IV for several days. And guess what? That wasn't the first time he ate rat poison. Like in Chengdu, I couldn't, even when he was on a leash, we'd just be walking down the street and there'd be a pile of rat poison and he'd stop and eat it. And I'd be like, God, no. So I treated him for rat poison 3 times while living in that city. And he's still around today. There he is. He's very independent, has a mind of his own, usually doesn't listen to me, but very loyal. And I'm gonna be taking him to the US when I move back in June. So that's a bit of a process. I'm not gonna bore you with that, but he's gonna go in the cargo underneath. I've actually flown with him before. I put him in a crate on an airplane moving from Chengdu to Beijing, and he went underneath and he like came out with the oversized baggage. So it's been done before, but this next trip is gonna be 13-14 hours, so I'm just hoping for the best. And yeah, I'll give you updates on that later. Peace.